Hey everybody, what's going on? Welcome to GNR Central. And with the new book, Serve the Servant, coming out by Danny Goldberg, who was Nirvana's former manager, he's been talking a lot, of course, about Nirvana and Kurt Cobain, but Axl Rose and Guns N' Roses' name has come up quite recently as well. And there's been some news stories that we've heard about the Guns N' Roses and Nirvana feud that we really hadn't heard before. And I want to talk today about why Kurt had such a problem with Guns N' Roses and some of the events where they almost crossed paths before the infamous 1992 VMAs. So according to interviews Danny Goldberg gave to Yahoo, it was a video interview he gave, he revealed that at one point Axl Rose wanted Nirvana to play his birthday party. So here's what he had to say about that. He said that Axl Rose probably knew what happened, and then later on he asked him to do the birthday party. And of course, Nirvana's not going to do a birthday party for Axl Rose. And, Kurt's whole thing about being a feminist. And, this was a time when Guns N' Roses had a song that was on one of their big albums that are referred to, and I think it says expletive in the article, but I'm guessing it's back off bitch. And, couldn't have been something more offensive to somebody like Kurt than that. So they were just culturally in different camps at the time. And then after the Vanity Fair article came out, Axl Rose said something very rude, that Kurt and Courtney should be in jail or something like that. And it was pretty gross. Now, in a newly released excerpt from Serving the Servant, Danny Goldberg also discussed Kurt Cobain rejecting an offer to meet Guns N' Roses frontman Axl Rose at a Nirvana show as early as 1991. So he told a story where he said, in Los Angeles, where Geffen was headquartered and much of the media was based, we wanted to make room for more people to see them, so an underplay didn't make sense. October 27th, a month after Nevermind had been released, Nirvana would headline the Palace Theater, which had about 2,200 seats, which was the biggest place that Nirvana had headlined up until that moment, and the show quickly sold out. The band had been consistently playing great shows, and this was no exception. Backstage afterwards, Eddie Rosenblatt, who was the head of Geffen Records, told me that he had come with Axl Rose and asked if he could bring him into the dressing room to say hi to Kurt. When I conveyed the request, Kurt grimaced and said he didn't really want to meet the Guns N' Roses singer. I didn't want to put Geffen's president in an untenable situation, so I suggested to Kurt that he and I leave the dressing room and then I'd give Rosenblatt a couple passes. That way it wouldn't seem like they were being excluded and just that Kurt couldn't be found. So Kurt nodded and I walked outside, delivering the passes to Rosenblatt, and asked if he and Rose could wait 5 minutes for the Nirvana singer to change clothes, as I put it. Then I went back in and grabbed Kurt and we ducked out through a back door. Rosenblatt never gave me shit about it afterwards, so the charade worked on some level, but I doubt it left Rose with a great taste in his mouth. Here's Axl talking about Kurt and Courtney in the wake of that Vanity Fair article that seemed to basically paint them as new parents who had basically still had a drug habit. And here's what Axl had to say about it.
We've had our share of problems with so-called alternative bands. What is this word? I mean, I didn't find myself using it. Alternative. Like someone who leads an alternative lifestyle. All I know is that when Guns N' Roses started, ain't no fucking radio stations wanted to play our shit either. Ain't no radio stations wanted to play Metallica. So I think we have the world's biggest alternative crowd here tonight. I think that the problem starts when you start thinking that you're different from everybody else on the fucking planet. You may be a little different in what you're doing or how you're going about doing it, but I got a good feeling that you're probably a human. Right? You're probably a human being. And so right now, alternative, only thing that means to me is someone like Kurt Cobain in Nirvana, who basically is a fucking junkie with a junkie wife. And if the baby's born deformed, I think they both ought to go to prison. That's my feeling. And he's too good and too cool to bring his rock and roll to you. Because the majority of you, he doesn't like or want to play to or even have you like his music. It seems to be a general feeling among a lot of alternative bands that they don't want the majority of people even liking them. They like it on the outside.
Now, one thing a lot of fans don't really realize is that Axl had a pretty heartbreaking reaction to Kurt Cobain's death. Even though they had feuded in the press, they'd feuded, personally when they met one another at the 1992 VMAs. We were fortunate enough to interview Guns N' Roses' former manager Doug Goldstein about a year ago, and we asked him about Axl's reaction to Kurt's death, and here's what he had to say. He said, "It didn't matter. He knew that Kurt was a fellow tortured artist, and he was very upset. He was despondent, and I don't know if it's in Duff's book or not, but Duff wrote on an airplane back from Los Angeles the day before he killed himself, referring to Kurt. Duff had PTSD around the fact that he didn't hug him and say, 'Come with me, don't go to your house.' And it wasn't just that strong of an effort, it was an afterthought. But you can't put the genie back in the bottle." He also discussed Axl's depression in more detail, saying, "I had lived with it with my own brother, who's a genius manic depressive, who attempted suicide a number of times, so it wasn't that foreign to me. I just relived my childhood basically. He was my best friend, and Axl was born 6 years later, but born the day after my brother. So the Aquarian tortured genius manic depressive, I shared a room with that guy for 14 years, and that was my brother. And it made me more empathetic. I certainly understood, and I was the one he could call at 2, 3, or 4 in the morning, and that Axl wasn't doing well. I happened to be the guy to go sit with him, sometimes for days at a time." Now, I know some people have heard me talk about this before, and some people in the comments were like, "This can't be true. Axl was an asshole. There's no way he was sad that Kurt was upset, or that Kurt had died, I should say." And this has been corroborated by somebody else too. So if you guys have ever read the book Everybody Loves Our Town, they interviewed Brynn Breidenthal, who was Geffen's PR person. So she did PR for Nirvana and Guns N' Roses because both bands were label mates. And she talked a bit about how Axl wanted Nirvana to open for Guns N' Roses and how he responded to the death of Kurt Cobain. She said Axl wanted Nirvana to open for Guns N' Roses because he too heard in the music something very, really special, and he wanted to do whatever he could, figuring that they were this new young band and not realizing that they were at the front door of a movement. He didn't just understand that they wanted to, and Amy, his sister, worked for him. She called me one day and said, "Why won't they take our help?" referring to Nirvana to open for Guns N' Roses, to which Brynn Breidenthal said, "Because you represent everything they're against. Basically, you're a big, successful corporate $1 million rock band, and that's the antithesis of Nirvana." But in my opinion, Nirvana was just that. They were a big, successful corporate $1 million rock band anyways. And she went on to say, but Axl didn't think of Guns N' Roses in that way. Brynn talked about being the first person to tell Axl what happened. She said, "The first thing I did when I got back to my hotel room was to call Axl because I was afraid of how the news might impact him. He was such an emotional roller coaster. I was afraid that Axl would hurt himself. He felt things really deep and felt a real connection there. And even though there was no connection from the other side, I think he had a lot of empathy for Kurt. I was on the phone with Axl until about 3 in the morning. Ultimately, it was okay, but I don't remember what was said because I've had so many hours and hours of those kinds of conversations with him. One time I got off the phone with him and my teeth were chattering and I felt like I was the ant. I was the energy inside my head. The energy was inside my head. We were just talking on a level that wasn't there and now. It was just pure energy and an out-of-body experience, and he said that my body acts like it's freezing or something. It was just so intense." Now, the book Serving the Servant came out at the beginning of the month. I haven't had a chance to read it, but with all these stories about Axl, I'm definitely intending on picking it up and possibly reviewing it on my channel. And the reviews so far for it have been pretty positive. I mean, we've had all these autobiographies about Kurt Cobain and these movies done, but I think, with the fact that Danny Goldberg was the former manager of the band, he's got an insight that a lot of people really haven't seen. And I think his story is really going to be fascinating. And even the reviews from not just the readers, but even from some of the news publications that have talked about it. There's some great stuff. Like Forbes said, an expansive and insightful account of rock's most tragic figure, and arguably the most intimate and first-hand biography about Cobain's experience of fame to date. The Observer said, sheds new light on the image of Cobain as a tortured artist and reveals the compassion and ambition that truly drove him. And then finally, Cameron Crowe, who worked a lot with those Seattle bands, said, add to this rich sonic legacy of Nirvana, Goldberg's soulful account of Cobain as a close friend gone way too soon, yet vividly alive on every page of this remarkable book. So I'd like to know from you guys, are you planning on picking up the book? And I know Guns N' Roses versus Nirvana is like a very hot topic of debate when it comes to my channel. I personally love both bands, but for me, Guns N' Roses was much more of a meaningful band to me, but I still love Nirvana at the end of the day. Let me know your thoughts down below, guys. Thanks for watching, and be sure to hit the like button and subscribe. Take care.